Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking at some really powerful material you've brought in. It's a narrative called The Abandoned Baby.
Yes, and it's all detailed in these pretty comprehensive production notes. It really throws you straight into the human cost, the very personal side of what happened in Russia in the 90s, after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Right, that whole period of massive upheaval.
Exactly. And at the heart of it, well, the notes really focus on this young woman, Tatyana Podkoritov. She's facing just an unimaginable situation.
What happens?
Well, her boyfriend, Andrei Ivanovich, he gets conscripted, pulled into this really brutal war, and it leaves her totally alone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and pregnant and facing just crushing poverty. The system around her is just collapsing.
So she's got no support?
None. And this leads her, the notes describe it as an agonizing decision to abandon their newborn son, Andrei Jr.
Gosh, and what's really striking from the outline you shared is that this isn't just about that one moment, that one terrible choice.
No, not at all.
It follows the consequences, right? Like down through the years, across generations almost.
That's the core of it. It traces these ripple effects, and it culminates, you won't believe this, years later when Andrei Jr. actually returns to where he was born.
No way.
Yeah, but he's not coming back as a Russian. He's a U.S. soldier, completely unaware.
Wow. That's an incredible arc. It really shows how, personal lives just get swept up in these huge historical geopolitical events.
It really does. The narrative is, it's just incredibly skillful at showing that human toll. War, economic collapse, but also themes like sacrifice.
And abandonment, obviously.
Right. And that search, that constant human thing for hope, maybe even forgiveness. And it sort of reframes sacrifice, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, it suggests sacrifice isn't always, some big heroic public gesture. Sometimes it's hidden, desperate, like Tatyana's choice.
Yeah.
There's this line where she basically says, I can't afford to feed you, not even myself.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. And it forces you, the reader or the viewer, to ask, can leaving your child ever be an act of love? The story powerfully suggests maybe yes in these circumstances.
And the way the story is apparently structured, according to the notes, really hammers home that generational impact.
Yeah, talk about that.
Well, it starts with archival footage, right? USSR dissolving, 1991, sets the scene, then jumps to Tatyana in 98, right in her crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But then it follows Andrei Jr. It shows him growing up at age 4, then 8, 12, 17, and finally 20 when he returns.
So you see the consequences unfold over time visually.
Exactly. It's not just telling you, it's showing you how these huge historical forces just cascade down through one family, one life. It feels almost like destiny, especially when he ends up deployed back to Irkutsk.
His birthplace.
His actual birthplace.
Yeah.
It completes this tragic circle.
Which brings us back to that really tough question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How does love show up in situations like this?
Yeah.
Normally you'd say abandonment is the opposite of love.
Right.
But the narrative complicates that. The notes mention the nurses at the hospital. They see this happen all the time.
They must have seen so much.
And they sort of echo Tatyana's pain, asking, do you think anyone wants to leave their baby here? And then Anya, who runs the orphanage, she's portrayed as very compassionate.
Okay.
And she apparently reinforces this idea, saying it was not out of apathy, but out of love. It really deepens that whole idea of sacrifice. It's not indifference, it's complex,
Yeah.
driven by a terrible kind of affection.
And digging into the outline, there was this other element proposed, something meant to tie it all together, this wooden bird.
Ah, yes, the bird. That's such a fascinating piece of symbolism they plan to weave in.
What was the idea behind it?
Well, initially, Andrei Sr. carves it and gives it to Tatyana before he goes to war. It's like a symbol of their hope, for the future, for their family.
A little token of hope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then when Tatyana makes that awful choice to leave the baby, she leaves the bird with him. So it changes, right? It goes from being a gift between them to being, well, like a mother's prayer. The only piece of his heritage, his connection to them, that she can possibly give him. A silent message.
That's incredibly poignant. So it becomes this link to his past, even if he doesn't know it.
Precisely. And the idea was that later you'd see this bird subtly. It's there in his life in America, maybe in his adoption box or something.
Something he holds on to without knowing why.
Yes. Fueling this subconscious pull, this search for identity he can't quite name. And then the big payoff, the climax the narrative builds towards.
His return to Irkutsk.
Right. He's there, deployed, he's drawn to a particular house, maybe sees similar carvings, knocks on the door.
And
An older Tatyana, or maybe Andrei Sr. if he survived, opens the door. And it's not like they recognize each other's faces after all that time.
No, how could they?
But maybe he has the bird, or they see it. It's the object. That wooden bird, that triggers the recognition. A reunion across decades, continents, unimaginable pain.
That simple object bridging that huge gap. Wow.
It really ties the whole fractured family history together.
So, stepping back, this deep dive into the abandoned baby, it really lays bare this story of incredible human resilience, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that enduring search for meaning, even when things seem completely chaotic and bleak.
It's a reminder, I suppose, that even in the darkest situations, you can find these glimpses of hope and maybe eventually a path towards forgiveness, however hard that might be.
Mm-hmm. And that symbol, the wooden bird, carrying through the generations. It just beautifully captures how love, in some form, can endure and reconnect lives that have been torn apart.
It definitely leaves you thinking. It makes you consider, how much are our own lives, our own paths shaped by things we don't even know about, by the unresolved history, the desperate choices of people who came before us.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're really digging into that incredibly powerful bond between the sisters, Tatyana and Katya, in The Abandoned Baby. It's set against, well, the chaos of 1990s post-Soviet Russia. Social services basically gone, just desperation everywhere. And their relationship becomes this vital anchor. Our mission today is to look at their dialogue and see how it shows coping, support, and just, well, resilience when everything's falling apart.
Yeah, it's fascinating how their conversations really give you a roadmap for survival. Think about when Tatyana first arrives at Katya's. She's just done this unthinkable thing, and Katya doesn't immediately demand answers, right? It's straight to, come inside, warm bath, fresh clothes, then talk. That's not just being nice. It's a learned survival tactic when there's no safety net.
Exactly. Practical first. Address the immediate physical needs. It shows how when society just collapses your family, your closest people, they become your only real support system. That practical care before the emotional deep dive, it just screams survival.
And that pragmatism, it extends to how they cope emotionally, too. Like when Tatyana says, I feel like a total piece of shit. Katya's response is that classic, kind of tough love, isn't it? Hey, don't talk about my sister like that. You're amazing. I'm here. It's playful but firm. Stops Tatyana from just, drowning in self-pity.
But there are limits to that humor, aren't there? Later, Katya tries that dark humor again, joking about Tatyana abandoning the baby, like a baby.
Oh, yeah.
And Tatyana's reaction, that furious, not funning eye, it hits you like a ton of bricks. It shows you exactly where the raw pain is. Some things are just too raw to joke about, especially right then.
And it points to another way they cope, pushing the blame outwards. They talk about the stupid war or just men suck.
Yeah.
It's not just venting. It's a way to frame their personal suffering as part of this larger shared mess. It validates their pain by connecting it to, well, the system failing everyone.
Which leads perfectly into that amazing line from Katya.
Oh, yeah.
Then I'll sit with you in the wreckage until you do. Brick by brick, we'll build you back.
So powerful.
It's about Tatyana, yes, but it also mirrors the whole country trying to rebuild itself, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It places her struggle within that bigger picture, makes it feel, less isolating, more understandable.
And this really highlights how priorities get warped in extreme hardship.
Definitely. Like the police situation is serious, but Katya's immediate thought is food.
Oh.
Straight to the market, into that chaos.
Basic survival just takes over, doesn't it? Legal stuff becomes secondary.
You even see it in that seemingly small comment about the bad date.
The stale bread line.
Yeah, like stale bread, it's there when you need it, but I don't really want it. In a place struggling with actual food scarcity, that metaphor has, layers.
It speaks to scarcity, but also deep disappointment, yeah.
And Katya's response is just brilliant. Oh, I'm not stale, I'm fresh-baked, warm, and tasty.
Yes.
Yes.
It's her refusing to be devalued.
Exactly. It's like, this world might be bleak, but I still have worth, I still have life in me. It's pure spirit.
Which brings us back to Tatyana's sacrifice. The photo scene is key here.
Looking at old family pictures.
And Tatyana realizes, we didn't have much, but I never felt poor then.
Right. Poverty isn't just material lack.
It's emotional lack. And suddenly, her decision, it gets reframed.
It becomes this act of profound love, doesn't it? Giving her son a chance at that emotional richness, even if she can't provide it.
And Katya again, with the wisdom.
Always Katya.
That line about ghosts. Sometimes ghosts come back, and sometimes we learn to live without them.
It's such a pragmatic, hard-won peace. It accepts the grim reality, but still leaves a tiny space for hope, maybe?
Or just acknowledges the need to keep going, regardless.
Yeah.
Acceptance.
Yeah. Ultimately, you see through their words the real human cost when society breaks down, but you also see this incredible resilience, this power in their bond.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about our own lives. How do our own close relationships act as survival tools when we face our own kind of wreckage?
And that idea of rebuilding, brick by brick. What are your bricks? Who's helping you place them?
Something to definitely reflect on, a powerful look at finding strength after loss. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at The Abandoned Baby, using a really compelling screenplay and some insightful narrative analysis you've brought. We're plunging into this story about how human connections, well, how they endure incredible hardship. It's set in 1990s post-Soviet Russia. Tough time.
Absolutely. And our mission, really, for this deep dive is to see how love, sacrifice, memory, how these things aren't just passive survivors. They're actively shaped, maybe even strengthened, when everything else just seems to fall apart. You might find some surprising insights into resilience here.
Okay, let's get into it. First up is Andre. There's this letter he writes. It's from a war zone, described as a frozen wasteland, shells falling. How does someone even hold on to hope there?
Well, the analysis really emphasizes that writing the letter itself is key. It's more than just sending news. It's framed as a vital coping mechanism for him. The source says it's like, the only way I feel like I'm still human out here, it's about fighting dehumanization.
You really feel that vulnerability.
Oh, definitely. Lines like, every time I close my eyes, I see you, and thinking about their son every damn day. It's raw paternal love amidst chaos.
And there's something else too, right? This scarf Tatyana gave him. It's mentioned as a kind of armor.
Yes, exactly. It starts as just a tangible link, something physical from home. But the narrative suggests it grows into something more, a symbol, emotional protection almost, a shield against the despair.
Right. So while Andre is facing that horror, Tatyana is facing something else entirely back home. The story shifts to her apartment. It's described as colder now, dim, and she makes this devastating choice, abandoning their baby.
And this is where it gets incredibly complex. It sounds on the surface like the worst thing imaginable, but the sources are clear. Not out of apathy, but out of love. It's a paradox.
Driven by what? Just sheer desperation.
Total desperation, crushing poverty, no support system, nothing. The screenplay really paints this picture of wanting a better life for him. Somewhere warm, with milk, with love. Things she just couldn't provide.
Wow. And yet her own love is still there.
Undeniably. The narrative shows her pain, how she wakes up reaching for him or hears his cry in dreams. It's presented as the ultimate, most painful sacrifice.
Then there's this moment in her letter, the forgiveness part. I forgive you for leaving, and I hope someday you can forgive me for letting go. That feels huge.
It's pivotal because it acknowledges their separate, parallel struggles and, well, they're different forms of abandonment, if you want to call it that. It creates this shared ground, this mutual understanding that has to be there before anything else can happen.
Okay, so that paves the way. And then we have these photo albums, tangible things.
Exactly, anchors to the past. First, there's a family album. That one seems to be about processing shared grief, looking back at family history, showing resilience, love, even when, as the text says, they didn't have much.
But then the couples album, that plays a different role, right? Especially after Andre comes back.
Oh, absolutely. This is after he knows about the baby. The narrative describes him hesitating, just touching the cover. You feel his pain. But then he opens it, sees pictures of them happy. Foundational happiness, the analysis calls it. Tatyana laughing, simple moments.
And that changes something.
It's a catharsis. He whispers, we were happy. Even with nothing, a leaking roof, they were happy. It's not just looking back, it's like recalibrating his whole perspective.
And that leads to him saying, they can't take these from us. Not this.
Yes. That specific line, it's defiance. It's the moment he seems to truly forgive her internally and decides, okay, let's give this another shot.
So the shared hardship, the war, the poverty, the loss, it didn't just break them.
Paradoxically, no. The analysis suggests it actually fortified their connection in a way, confronting it together, not hiding from it. And Andre's realization is key. I don't blame you. I blame this country, this war. He shifts the blame outwards.
Which allows for empathy towards Tatyana.
Exactly. Genuine empathy. It moves their love beyond, simple romance into something much deeper, mature, built on understanding, sacrifice, forgiveness.
It's quite a journey. Tatyana and Andre show us that even when everything seems designed to tear people apart,
that capacity for connection, it's incredibly strong. It finds a way.
It's not about pretending the damage isn't there, is it?
Not at all. It's about the commitment to rebuild right there in the wreckage, brick by brick. Their story really says that authentic love isn't about perfection. It's about endurance, sticking it out, finding wealth in memory and connection when everything else is gone.
So a final thought, perhaps, for you listening. What are those tangible memories, or maybe those profound acts of forgiveness, that anchor your most resilient relationships? And what promises do they hold, even when life throws its worst at you? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really plunging into the heart of storytelling.
Yeah, looking at how certain stories become unforgettable.
Exactly. And specifically, this concept called Chekhov's gun. We're using this incredible, source material for a film called The Abandoned Baby to explore it. It's a multi-generational story.
Powerful stuff.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
So picture this, 1990s Russia, post-Soviet times. It's bleak.
Overwhelming poverty, yeah.
And you have Tatyana Podkoritov.
Yeah.
Her partner, Andrei, he's conscripted, sent off to a really brutal war.
And she's pregnant, right?
Yes. And facing this, she makes just an agonizing decision to abandon her newborn son, Andrei Jr.
Wow.
The story then tracks the ripples, across decades. It ends with Andrei Jr., now a U.S. soldier, returning to his birthplace, Irkutsk.
Without even knowing it's his birthplace.
Exactly, unwittingly. So that massive scope brings us to Chekhov's gun.
Right, so Chekhov's gun isn't always like a literal gun.
Not always literal, no.
It's more a narrative principle. Basically, anything you introduce, especially something you draw attention to, it has to pay off.
It needs a purpose later on.
It absolutely must serve a purpose. If
Yeah.
you show that pistol hanging on the wall in Act 1...
It's got to be fired by Act 3, metaphorically or literally.
Precisely. And in movies, this is so often visual. You use the camera to say, this matters.
You establish its significance.
And then later, there's a visual firing, a moment where that object changes the narrative.
Okay, so for a complex story like The Abandoned Baby, spanning years, continents, how do you do that?
That's the challenge, right? Bridging those huge gaps.
You need something tangible.
A unifying object, something that can travel through the story and connect these different lives.
And here it's not, say, a teddy bear, which you might expect.
No, something much more specific, much more resonant.
It's a hand-carved wooden bird.
Yes. And that choice is brilliant.
Why the bird, specifically?
Well, it connects deeply to Siberian folk art, Slavic tradition, plus its origin.
It's from the father, Andrei. He made it.
Exactly. He's a carpenter. So it's infused with his identity, his hope, right from the start, not just some generic item.
Okay, so it's got this built-in history. How does it function as this Chekhov's gun?
It works across 4 key stages. First is the planting.
Setting it up.
Right. Before Andrei leaves for the war, he gives the bird to Tatyana, who's pregnant. He says something like, I carved this for the baby's cradle.
Oh, wow.
So he knows his father was a carpenter, not just a soldier. Promise you'll keep it safe. It's about hope, his identity, a promise he'll return.
A promise that gets heavy fast.
Tragically heavy. Which leads to stage 2, the sacrifice.
When she leaves the baby.
Yes. Tatyana leaves that very wooden bird with Andrei Jr. when she abandons him. It's transformed
From a gift to something else.
to like this profound act of love under duress, a prayer maybe, the only piece of his heritage, his father, she can give him.
Just heartbreaking, so it stays with him.
It does. Stage 3, the reminder. The bird shows up in Andrei Jr.'s life in America. Maybe he finds it in his adoption papers box, Sees flashes of it in nightmares even.
So it's this mysterious thing from his unknown past.
Exactly. An enigma. It's fueling this subconscious search for who he is. It's the gun hanging on the wall of his psyche, sort of.
Waiting to be fired. Which
Yep.
brings us to the payoff.
The payoff. Stage 4. This happens when Andrei Jr. is deployed in Irkutsk, back where he began.
Okay.
He's drawn, maybe instinctively, to a particular house. It has distinctive hand-carved birds decorating the window frames.
Like his bird.
Very similar. He feels compelled to knock. He's holding his own weathered bird.
Who answers?
An older Tatyana. Or maybe even Andrei, if he survived and returned somehow. They see the bird he's holding.
Instant recognition.
A lifetime collapses in that moment. Connection across decades. Destiny fulfilled. The gun is finally fired.
And the bird itself, its meaning, it's not static, is it? You mentioned folklore.
Not at all. In Slavic tradition, birds can mean so many things. Hope, like birds signaling spring. The soul, messengers between worlds. Motherhood, enduring love.
So its meaning kind of evolves with the story, with the characters.
Absolutely. And remember the context. 1990s Russia, economic collapse, war, no safety net. That environment is almost an antagonist itself.
Forcing these terrible choices.
Right. And the bird, this piece of old Russia folk art, travels through all that chaos. It represents resilience.
And it ties everyone together.
Intricately. For Tatyana, it's her sacrifice made physical. For Andre, maybe lost family, a chance for redemption if he sees it again. For Andre Jr.,
It's the key.
the key to everything, his identity, his past, his destiny.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back, what's the big takeaway here for us, for you listening?
I think it shows how powerful a single, well-chosen object can be.
It's not just set dressing.
Not at all. It carries the emotional weight, the themes. It transforms a series of events into something deeply interconnected, a saga.
Yeah.
It's about building that resonance through details that matter.
Making the story stick.
Yeah, making it unforgettable. Which leads to a question, maybe? What about in your own life, or in other stories you love? Are there small details, things easily overlooked?
That might actually be the most important. Chekhov's guns.
Exactly. Waiting to reveal their real significance. What are those hidden keys?
Something to think about. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're about to plunge into a story that, well, it truly gripped me as I looked through the sources you shared. The Abandoned Baby. This isn't just drama. It's a really poignant look at family, desperation, sacrifice, identity, too, all set against post-Soviet Russia.
Right, a very tumultuous time.
And what makes it so compelling, I think, is that it's explicitly based on real events that gives it this, real weight, authenticity.
Absolutely. It hits differently when you know there's truth behind it.
So the core idea, the logline is this. When her boyfriend is drafted into a distant war and poverty closes in, a young mother is forced to make the agonizing decision to abandon her infant son,
Yeah.
setting her on a path of survival, guilt, and the faint hope of redemption.
And that phrase, faint hope of redemption, that's actually crucial, isn't it?
Oh, so?
Well, it immediately signals that this isn't just going to be unrelenting tragedy. It suggests resilience, maybe, a glimmer of something positive.
Right, kind of lifts it, gives you something to hold on to as a listener.
Exactly. It hints at human will, even in the bleakest settings. It keeps you engaged.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Diving deeper into the sources, we have Tatyana Podkoritov facing this impossible choice, abandoning her newborn, Andre Jr.
And it's driven entirely by the circumstances. Dire socioeconomic conditions.
Yeah, post-Soviet Russia.
Right.
We're talking food shortages, the economy basically collapsing.
And on top of that, her partner, Andre, he's conscripted, forced into this brutal war.
It's just an absolutely devastating situation for her.
It is, but here's where it gets really interesting in the narrative.
Okay?
The story immediately reframes her act. It's not indifference, not at all. It's portrayed as a desperate act of selfless love.
Selfless love.
Yeah. A heart-wrenching sacrifice for her son's potential future. She actually says it something like, I can't give you the life you deserve. I have nothing.
Nothing to give you, can't feed you, or even myself.
Exactly. No way to keep you safe and raise you right. It's brutal honesty.
And this perspective, it's reinforced,
Yeah.
right, by others in the story.
Yes, profoundly. The hospital nurses, they saw this happening constantly. One source mentions a line like, that's number 6 tonight.
6 babies abandoned in one night.
And another observation, just heartbreaking, no one comes here without crying first. Even Anya, the orphanage head, she understood. She saw it wasn't apathy, it was love.
That completely changes how you think about abandonment. It challenges those quick negative judgments.
It really does. It asks you, the listener, to look deeper.
So Tatyana makes this agonizing choice. How does that decision echo through the generations? Because it clearly does.
Oh, absolutely. That's central. Honor Jr., the baby, he grows up Americanized, adopted, completely unaware of his Russian background.
Until
In this, twist of fate, he's deployed as a U.S. soldier back to Irkutsk, his birthplace.
No way. Back to where it all started.
Exactly. And this throws up huge questions, right? Identity, generational trauma, the echoes of the past.
There's that line from the deployment officer to Andre Jr., something like,
Yeah, it's powerful. You'll soon figure out who you are out there and maybe what you're actually fighting for.
wow. It directly points to this fated connection.
Yeah.
The cyclical nature of conflict, too.
Precisely. The past isn't buried, It finds ways to resurface.
Speaking of connections, I saw a really interesting creative idea in the project notes. This wooden bird.
Ah, yes. The wooden bird. That could be such a powerful element.
Explain that. What's the idea?
So it's like a potential ghost prop, a small hand-carved toy. Maybe Andre, the father, gives it to Tatyana for the baby just before he leaves for the war.
Okay.
Then Tatyana, in her grief, leaves this bird with the baby when she abandons him. It becomes the only tangible link.
Like a Chekhov's gun, you mean? Introduced early, pays off later.
Exactly that. It could reappear somehow in Andre Jr.'s American life. Maybe he kept it, doesn't know why. It's the subconscious tie to his origin.
And then in Irkutsk,
Huh.
maybe he sees another carving like it.
Yeah.
Or someone recognizes the style.
Right. Leading to this incredibly powerful, cathartic moment of discovery or reunion based purely on this small object.
That adds a whole other layer. Okay, so bringing all these threads together,
Mm-hmm.
what's the big takeaway here? What does this deep dive into the abandoned baby really show us?
Well, I think it reveals these deeply interconnected themes: war, poverty, sure, but also sacrifice on a profound level, hope, forgiveness, the whole struggle for identity.
Mm-hmm.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, these struggles, they aren't just historical artifacts, are they?
No, sadly not.
War, economic hardship, families being torn apart. Look at contemporary global crises,
Mm-hmm.
refugee situations, economic downturns. The core human struggles are universal.
Which makes a story like this feel incredibly relevant, timely even. It resonates today.
It really does. It speaks to those universal experiences in a very personal way.
The narrative also highlights this recurring pattern, doesn't it? Military service, promises across generations. So here's a final thought for you listening. What stands out to you when you think about this idea? That the past, no matter how deeply you try to bury it, can always find a way back, always demand some kind of reckoning in our own lives. Something to think about